So, hello, I'm going to spend, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes maybe, talking about a topic that I'm really interested in. Now, I happen to have noticed there's just not enough trust in the world. We're living in crazy times, lots of change, and one of the cornerstones of the relationship between a learning designer and our colleagues and our subject matter experts is trust. So, for various reasons, maybe trust is something that workplaces need to focus a little bit more on. Now, this was emphasised. One of my learners in the learning design course that I teach sometimes was interested in trust, and I said immediately, well, they're kind of tricky because if we've got skills and knowledge as our training, we want to develop some training, that's more straightforward. Something like trust is a kind of bit more complex. So then I did some reflecting and I did some, looking around. I've got some notes, and that's what I want to talk through, mainly so I can post this back on the Canvas website so the student can, like I'm talking to the student type thing. Now, one of the things rather than, and these are from my notes, when we're having a training program, rather than framing it, this program will build trust between employees, it's too grand. We need to kind of approach it in a more manageable way. It might be, this is one approach, the program develops communication, collaboration, accountability, and relationship building capabilities that underpin high trust workplace relationships. So for us as learning designers, it's more manageable and it's easier to assess whether we've done a good job or not if we focus on those skills and attributes and knowledge rather than go too high. Now, there are other things similar that are like when you're teaching values or if you're teaching attitude. I've just got a few more. Hang on, where are we? I did things like empathy. Can you train people? Yes, you can. However, not directly. We need to use other strategies. Can you teach creativity? Yes, you can, but we need to use other strategies. They're of a higher order of complexity. So, and I really like this sort of territory. It's like workplace culture, that type of thing. I did have a list of all these other ones that are very tricky to kind of tricky and difficult to train. Attitudes, beliefs, and habits. So we tackle them by approaching them by looking at the underpinning skills. Of course, there's no guarantees. It's also about the context and the environment. However, this is where how we would approach something like trust. I'm going to go all the way to the top of my notes. So in terms of developing, or for the assignment, we're not developing an entire program of work, but we would map out, what our approach would be. Would it be online? Is it face-to-face? How long would it take? Who's involved? There would probably be group activities and group discussions, but we can't say for sure. You probably would have reflection activities. So I would recommend, I don't want to do the students' assignment for them, but I do want to offer guidance. But if you develop some learning outcomes, and I'm reading them, and they all start with a verb, and I won't read them out, but they're things like identify behaviours that strengthen or undermine trust, for example. It might be apply active listening. It might be give and receive constructive feedback. So that's really tangible. We can give them a tick. We can see that they're giving and receiving constructive feedback to their peers, maybe in an activity. So we can observe it happening. However, it builds upon not only the relationship between the two participants or more, three participants, but also it's developing this idea. We're heading towards developing a culture of trust. And as I said up front, I've certainly observed and experienced a kind of lack of trust. And I always put trust right up front whenever I start any new project with, especially in learning design, but also in media production. Trust is a really good starting point. And it's not always, sometimes it's assumed. People are busy, and if you skip that step, sometimes it has consequences down the track. So my suggestion to my student is to just think about some of the underpinning knowledge and skills that are in this territory, and I'm deliberately keeping that broad and open to interpretation. But then the next step is then to come up with some learning outcomes that I'm reading my little list. Building accountability. I don't know, that might be too grand. Maybe, in fact, the list that I have that I'm not reading out, maybe describe examples of trust in a workplace or something like that. But we don't want, for the purposes of our assignment, we don't want too many, because we need it to be manageable, because you only have 6 weeks, whereas if you're developing an entire program, you would spend a lot more time. So you might think about maybe what does defining trust at work, what does it look like? What are the causes of low trust? What are some success stories? What's the impact on productivity, morale, teamwork, output, well-being, staff well-being? And then you might have a little practical activity. And then communication, the type of communication that builds trust, for example. And I don't want to read all these out, but I guess I feel as though I've defined and explained enough about this sort of territory, which is essentially just, rather than tackling it head on, like any values-based, it's too big and slippery and tricky to kind of design for directly, but you can set the sort of environment by identifying the underpinning skills and knowledge. But areas to look at: accountability, commitment, responsibilities, communication, conflict resolution, possibly providing feedback, constructive feedback, a culture of trust. What does that look like? Maybe safety, inclusion, including people in teams. How do you support trust through everyday behaviour? I think I might leave it there. So there's plenty to think about: psychological safety, collaboration, respect, belonging, culture. And I guess in this territory, you're looking at more sophisticated learning design, because it's part of a workplace culture change, which sometimes takes a little bit. You can't just attend a training session one afternoon and tick the box, or even a training session over several weeks. It just doesn't work that way. It's more of a more sophisticated nature. So transparency and openness but these are areas, leadership and management are really important. Also, in the weeks 1 and 2, we looked at some areas of some performance gaps cannot be addressed with training alone. So this is a good example. You might state in your assignment that the training will be about trust, and this is what it'll look like, but it's part of a context of, we'll make these other changes to ensure the process is supported. So change management might come into it. So I think I will leave it there. Employee well-being is important. So there's a whole universe of stress management, burnout prevention, work-life boundaries, mental health awareness. So you could focus on just that area for your assignment. But they are difficult to train, but they are a nice, solid, enjoyable challenge, I believe. So hopefully that helps.